Hello, everyone. Hope you all are doing well and staying safe. I'm really delighted to have Ms. Trisha Ray with us today for our discussion on technology and society. Trisha Ray is an associate fellow at ORF's Technology and Media Initiative. Her research focuses on geotech and the security implications of emerging technologies. Prior to this, she was a program assistant at Asia Society Policy Institute in Washington, D.C. Thank you, Trisha, for joining in with us today.
Thanks, Jana. It's good to be here.
So, moving ahead with the questions today. So in January 2020, Ministry of External Affairs announced establishment of new emerging and strategic technologies to engage in tech diplomacy. So what are the expectations based on these interventions and how would India would be enfolding
them? Yes, so the NEST division, it's still, their mandate is still, I think, being figured out. But broadly, when we think about emerging technologies, there are three broad factors that NEST would need to consider in its policy making. The first is geopolitical, which is that digital spaces and technologies are increasingly salient because we've been forced to go online because of COVID-19. They're also under the weight of competing national interests and this retreat we're seeing of globalization. Because of the economic and strategic benefits of technologies, you'll see countries attempting to control their flows in varying ways. In some cases, this takes the form of protectionism, regionalization of supply chains, an emphasis on building domestic capacity, data localization, data protection. These are some examples. The second set of issues are related to economic growth and development. So India has its ambitions of becoming a 1 trillion digital economy, and technologies, the fourth IR technologies like IoT, quantum computing, AI, these are all part of that vision. At the same time, we're in the midst of the so-called demographic dividend. And so you have all these young people coming to the workforce and a workforce that is in flux because of the shifts we're seeing and due to the digitalization of work. So how to prepare them. And you also have an opportunity here because by 2025, India is expected to be home to nearly 1 billion internet users. And so India's connected population also presents a lot of opportunities for homegrown applications. There's a lot of opportunity there as well. Now, NEST would have to define itself not just vis-a-vis the other ministries who are doing work in this area, but also divisions within the MEA who are doing work here, including e-governance, IT, cyber diplomacy. But it shouldn't restrict itself to a policy corner either, because technology diplomacy is interministerial, it's multidisciplinary, so it has a nodal role to play. And so there is some positive developments there. The Emerging Technologies Initiative, for example, is a partnership between the Principal Scientific Advisor and NEST. So partnerships like this, I think, would be a good way to go forward.
Has been on an app ban spree in the past couple of months that we can see actually. So what are the primary reasons to it and how do you think it would impact the country strategically and economically?
So the immediate trigger for the app ban has, of course, been the Galwan crisis earlier this year, but really concerns about Beijing's data practices and its access to the data generated through Chinese apps. These concerns predate Galwan. In Doklam in 2017, for instance, the Ministry of Defense had directed the armed forces to uninstall around 50 apps because of these concerns. In the 2019 general elections, there were concerns about falsified information being hosted on certain platforms under ByteDance, as well as the use of these platforms for illegal activities. Now, in terms of consequences, the first is that we've seen a boost to the Indian app economy. A lot of existing apps have seen their downloads rise, but you also see a lot of new entrants in the Indian app economy. Apps like Josh, Share Karo, Mitron, Kaagaz Scanner. These have all risen as replacements to very popular free Chinese apps and have rapidly risen up the download charts. But the fact that these apps are Indian does not in itself fix the many issues that were raised when it comes to Chinese apps. These teams, especially for these startups, they're small. They are not equipped to tackle the influx of users. They don't have in place proper data protection measures or moderation processes or user complaint redressal processes. So all of this needs to be worked upon. And then Indian data protection legislation itself is a work in progress, and that would also need to be worked upon. And in terms of strategic consequences, it is likely that China would then put in place reciprocal measures. And the Indian startup economy, for example, is a large recipient of Chinese investment. Tencent, Alibaba, Didi Chuxing, these are all major investors in some of the most valuable e-commerce firms that we have here, and startups like Ola, Zomato, Paytm. So pulling out investment from these startups would really hurt the Indian startup economy. We haven't seen signs of that yet, but again, this is a possibility.
Right. So, moving ahead, 5G has been said to create like a societal transformation for India, like in the sector of e-governance to the overall development of the country. What is your take on it, to the challenges and the concerns and everything regarding it?
So in the 5G space, one set of issues is that because we've banned Chinese vendors uh, and are looking to build domestic alternatives, there'll be a delay in the 5G rollout, which of course is a cost that policymakers are willing to bear, and it's understandable. But the target rollout was, I believe, 2022. That's not likely to happen given that progress will be slowed considerably. And then the pandemic hasn't helped either. So the challenge of developing domestic alternatives and for this rollout is going to be immense. The second is that most of the country doesn't even have 4G yet. So we shouldn't jump the gun on a 5G rollout. So again, the slowness of the rollout is most likely given the state of our telecommunications infrastructure. Second set of issues has come up in relation to spectrum allocation. There have been complaints by the major bidders, Vodafone, Airtel, that spectrum allocation prices are way too high, especially given that there's a cash crunch right now. And then I believe a few have even gone bankrupt. And so spectrum allocation pricing is another very immediate barrier. Then for long-term issues, the connectivity that 5G enables and the speed of communication and the IoT applications that a lot of our 5G strategies have waxed on about. The issue is that we are not ready for that level of connectivity in terms of cybersecurity and cyber resilience. The cybersecurity capacity of enterprises, of government, and just imparting basic cyber hygiene skills to the individuals who will be operating these systems. So there's like a all of society approach needed to cybersecurity for an IoT applications rollout that isn't going to end in disaster. So that, yeah, that's my take on 5G.
Right. Quite interesting, I think, the 5G journey is going to be.
Yeah.
So, digital space has been full of the questions and debates over fake news. And in your experience, how appropriate it is to use this term, and how, as a society and as a country, we should be tackling with it.
So, fake news, in my opinion, it's an empty term because A, it's contradictory. News is news, fake news is not news. And it's also been stripped of all meaning because of the overuse by actors who often use that term to dismiss all forms of criticism by calling it fake news. So instead of framing the issue with that term, I think it's more useful to look at it in terms of disinformation or misinformation. So disinformation is deliberately spreading incorrect facts and information, and misinformation does not need an intent behind it. So say your uncle on Facebook posting something false is not disinformation, it's misinformation. And then the other framing with which we need to look at these issues is what is the intent behind the spread of false information. For some, it might be social engineering, as in you want a particular group of people to behave in a certain way, and therefore you are feeding them information that will lead them to do so. So like we've seen a lot of that happening with political processes. For example, prior to elections, you see a lot of this social engineering, misinformation or disinformation being spread. The second issue set can also come from, and we see less of that in India, and we've seen more of that triggering from the US elections, is where this disinformation is part of a larger hybrid operation by foreign actors to destabilize a country or to affect their processes. And so the big picture when we think about disinformation and misinformation is the defense of democratic processes and elections, as well as authentic public debate that doesn't skew one way or another based off of lack of proper information.
Right. Thank you, Trisha. I think this was a really insightful and an intriguing discussion. Thank you for joining in.
Thanks, Jenny.